For one brief second, I stood there with the door half shut behind me. The bar noise faded beneath the shock, and I honestly wondered if I'd finally lost my mind. It wasn't his hand grazing her knee that broke me. It wasn't even the way she leaned toward him with her lips slightly open, just like she used to lean into me when she still thought I was worth touching. It was her laugh. That light, fluttery laugh I hadn't heard in months. I figured it was gone. Maybe she'd outgrown it, lost it, or buried it beneath all those tired sighs and not-tonight excuses. But she hadn't lost anything. She'd simply taken it somewhere else and offered it to him like a private gift he deserved, and I didn't. They were sitting in our booth. The same one we used to claim every Friday before our life turned into whatever it had become. Before her messages started arriving later. Before she locked her phone. Before I began talking to the dog more than I spoke to my own wife. She still hadn't noticed me. So I stood there, trapped in some sick, slow-motion nightmare, watching my wife flirt like a teenager, while I squeezed my car keys hard enough for the metal to bite into my palm. I wasn't supposed to be there. She said she was going to book club. A book club at 9 on a Friday night, wearing heels. Did she really think I was that stupid? Still, I hadn't questioned her earlier. I never did. I just nodded like the obedient husband I'd become and said, "Have fun." Then I sat on the couch like an idiot, refreshing her location, while pretending I wasn't falling apart. Eventually, I stopped checking and got in the car. And now I was standing in the same bar where we'd shared our first kiss. The place where she once whispered, "I want to grow old with you." Now she was drinking something pink and laughing against another man's shoulder, like our entire marriage had been erased. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I walked toward their table slowly and quietly, like I was approaching a coffin. She looked up, and her expression collapsed. Panic, guilt, confusion. 1,000 explanations seemed ready to leave her mouth, but she couldn't force out a single word. As for me, I reached into my pocket and slid off my wedding ring. It was already loose from all the weight I'd lost over the past few months. I clenched it until the metal pressed against bone, then set it on the table in front of her. After that, I turned and walked away. She didn't come after me. Someone else did. That was when everything truly began falling apart. The cold struck me the moment I stepped outside. It was that thin, bitter kind of air that cuts through your shirt, like it's trying to tell you something you're too numb to understand. I didn't hurry toward my car. I couldn't. My whole body felt like poured concrete, heavy and slow. My heart seemed determined to crawl up my throat, and I could still feel the outline of the ring in my palm, even though I'd already left it behind. Then I heard footsteps. They weren't hurried or aggressive, just steady. Behind me, one person. I didn't turn around at first. Part of me believed, or maybe hoped, it was Mallory. Maybe she'd finally followed me. Maybe she had something worth saying. Maybe she'd realized I wasn't going to keep sitting quietly while she slipped into some stranger's arms behind my back. But the voice wasn't hers. "Hey, man, wait up." I stopped. It was him, the guy from the booth. The same man who'd rested his hand on her thigh like he owned the place. He was tall and carried himself with confidence, maybe 5 or 6 years younger than me. No wedding ring, no shame either. He caught up, but stayed several feet away, as if he didn't want to startle me. Or maybe he was still deciding how far he could take this. "Look," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know she was married. I stayed silent. I kept staring at the pavement, trying to decide whether punching the asphalt would help, or if I should just swallow everything and drive home. I'm not looking for a fight, he added quickly. I swear, I didn't know, man. She told me she was separated. That single word made something burst behind my eyes. Separated. Like our marriage was already over. Like I wasn't still making payments on her car. Like I hadn't cooked those stupid gluten-free meals for her 3 nights earlier while she scrolled through Instagram and mumbled, "Thanks," without even looking at me. "You didn't know?" I finally said, mostly to myself. "Of course you didn't. She's a great liar." He hesitated, and to his credit, he actually looked uncomfortable. "I never meant to destroy your life. If I'd known she was married, I wouldn't have touched her." I looked at him for the first time. Honestly, I couldn't tell whether I hated him or hated the fact that he had enough courage to tell me what my own wife couldn't. "She said she didn't want to be married anymore," he continued, his voice lower now. "She said you were boring and controlling, that she felt like a ghost in your house. It felt like someone slammed a tire iron into my chest." Those were my words. That was exactly how I felt. I lived with a stranger who barely noticed me, stopped touching me, and treated me like a responsibility, instead of someone she chose. "You can hate me," he said, "but she pursued me. She told me you were the one pulling away." I laughed, though it wasn't really laughter. It was more like the sound a man makes when something inside his head finally breaks loose, and he knows it can't be fixed. He slowly stepped back. "I won't see her again," he promised. "You deserve to know what she's been saying. That's it." Then he turned and went back inside the bar, as if none of it mattered. I stayed there for another minute, trying to breathe like I'd forgotten what my lungs were for. My wife, the woman I'd given 10 years of my life to, was calling me the ghost. She was telling strangers I was the reason she destroyed our marriage. I climbed into my car with shaking hands and sat there with the engine running. Then my phone lit up. 8 missed calls. "Mallory? 2:17 a.m.? Where are you? Please call me." "Mallory, 2:18 a.m. We need to talk. I can explain." "Mallory, 2:20 a.m. Please don't do anything stupid." That last message turned my blood cold. I wasn't planning to do anything stupid, but I was thinking about doing something permanent. It had nothing to do with hurting myself. It was about letting her watch me leave for good, without ever turning back. I didn't drive home. Not yet. I shut off the engine and sat alone in the dark parking lot, while the bar lights behind me buzzed like flies around a dead animal. Part of me believed that if I stayed still long enough, the world might rewind 10 minutes. Maybe I could walk inside again and find 2 strangers sitting in our booth. Maybe I'd imagined her lipstick on the edge of a glass that wasn't ours. Maybe his hand had never touched her thigh. But the buzzing never stopped. Not outside. Not inside my head. Her messages kept appearing on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Even the vibration made my stomach tighten. She was trying to pull me back before the silence grew too loud. That was how she always handled things. She buried the damage beneath panic and sweet words she didn't mean. This time, I gave her no noise. I gave her nothing. Instead of going home, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in years. My brother Garrett's house. We weren't close. Not since my wedding, when he tried warning me that Mallory wasn't the woman I thought she was. I called him paranoid and stopped speaking to him for almost a year. But that night, I sent him one word. Coming. He didn't answer. 15 minutes later, when I pulled into his driveway, the porch light came on. He never said, "I told you so." He didn't grin or try to make me feel worse. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and silently pointed toward the guest room. His silence felt like oxygen. For once, someone gave me space to breathe without wanting anything in return. I didn't sleep. I lay fully dressed on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, vibrating every 15 minutes like it had its own heartbeat. 20 missed calls, 3 voicemails, dozens of messages. But the final one hit harder than all the rest. Mallory, 3:48 a.m. You left me at the bar like I meant nothing. What the hell is wrong with you? No apology. No, please come home. No, we need to talk. Just, you left me. As if that was the betrayal. That was when something inside me shifted. I slowly sat up, my legs heavy as concrete, and my chest completely hollow. But my eyes were finally open. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused or shattered. I was finished. When morning came, I turned my phone on and took screenshots of her entire call history. Then I created a folder on my laptop and named it Exit. That was where I started building my quiet storm. Bank records, insurance documents, our lease. I studied every line like I was preparing for a final exam on freedom. I still didn't know exactly what I would do, but one thing had become perfectly clear. Mallory would never see it coming. She believed my silence meant I'd given up. I was going to show her what silence really felt like when the person she used to control suddenly vanished. By the time she understood, no amount of calling would save her. It was almost too easy. When I returned home, she'd already turned her guilt into a performance. The apartment looked cleaner than it had in months. She stood in the kitchen wearing that soft gray hoodie she knew I loved, pretending she'd spent the morning being a loyal, caring wife. I stayed in the doorway and watched her act out a life that was already dead. "You didn't answer your phone," she said without looking back. I walked inside like nothing had happened. I dropped my bag and removed my shoes. "Was with Garrett," I muttered. At least that part was true. She slowly turned and searched my face, trying to measure the storm gathering underneath. I showed her nothing. No anger, no hurt, only calm. She blinked, and I could tell my silence frightened her more than yelling ever could. "You left your ring," she said carefully, like she was dipping one toe into the water before swimming back into her lies. "At the bar. I have it." I stared directly into her eyes. "Thanks." That was all. No apology. No pleading. She stood there expecting questions. Who was he? How long had it been happening? Did she love him? I asked none of them, and I could see it driving her crazy. She needed a scene. She needed me to shout, cry, or beg so she could put on the victim's mask and convince herself she was the one being mistreated. Instead, I gave her the one thing she couldn't stand: silence. Over the next several days, I turned into a ghost inside my own home, but I was a careful one. I stayed present enough to make her think I was still hanging on, while keeping enough distance to remain invisible. I copied everything: passwords, credit card records, account information. I installed a call tracking app and connected it to the backup on our shared phone plan. When the same unknown number appeared at midnight, 1:12 a.m., and 2:47, I didn't confront her. I took screenshots and kept moving. Meanwhile, she started trying harder, almost desperately. She cooked again. Badly, but she tried. Sometimes she leaned against the doorway while I sat on the couch and asked, "Do you still love me?" Using that soft, fragile voice she'd used when we first began dating. But it sounded empty now. She wasn't worried that I had stopped loving her. She was terrified I no longer cared enough to fight over her. And she was right. One night, after she fell asleep, I picked up her phone. The password had changed. Cute. But earlier that day, I'd watched her enter it twice over her shoulder. She was far too wrapped up in herself to realize I was paying attention. The messages were worse than I'd imagined. They weren't only flirtatious. They were intimate. They said the kinds of things we hadn't told each other in years. There were endless conversations and saved pictures, some time-stamped during the hours she claimed she was out running errands. But the worst part was the name she'd saved him under. Future. It took every bit of control I had not to throw her phone across the room. But I didn't. I wasn't ready. The best revenge isn't loud or furious. It doesn't happen during a heated argument, through shattered plates, or in screaming fights on the front porch. No, the best revenge takes planning. It happens quietly. It comes after they believe they got away with everything, after they think they've won and finally lower their guard. So I placed her phone back where I found it. The next morning I kissed her cheek and said, "I was thinking we should take a trip soon. Just us. Maybe reconnect." She smiled like she'd already rewritten the whole story in her mind. She thought I was recovering, falling for her again, weak enough to forgive. But I was already gone. When the moment came, I planned to make her feel everything she'd put me through, only worse. She packed like we were going on a honeymoon. I watched from the doorway as she folded dresses she hadn't worn for me in years. She hummed softly and kept checking herself in the mirror, as if this trip proved she'd fixed our marriage. She kept asking if I was excited. I kept answering yes in the emptiest voice I could manage. She never noticed. Or maybe she didn't want to. We were supposed to leave Friday morning for a quiet mountain town. No cell service, just the two of us. To her, it was a fresh start. To me, it was a clean ending. The night before we were meant to leave, she curled beside me on the couch and rested her head against my shoulder. It felt strange, like someone I barely knew borrowing an old habit. She slowly traced circles along my arm and whispered, "I'm really glad you didn't give up on us." That almost broke me. Not because I still loved her the way I once had. That kind of love had been dead for a long time. It hurt because I finally understood how little she knew about what was happening. She believed surviving this meant winning me back. She didn't realize that survival, for me, meant leaving before I lost the last piece of myself. Once she fell asleep, I gently moved her arm and stood. I didn't hurry. I wasn't nervous. I took my time because I'd already accepted that this would be the final night I ever spent beside her. I walked into the spare room and pulled my bag from the closet. I'd packed it days earlier. There were no clothes for a weekend getaway inside. Only documents, hard drives, backups, and everything else I needed to quietly begin again. I left our suitcases near the door, so she wouldn't suspect anything. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote her a note. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply honest. I told her I knew about the messages, the name she'd saved him under, and every lie piled on top of another. I explained that I wasn't leaving to punish her. I was leaving because staying would destroy whatever remained of me. I told her she hadn't lost me when I walked into that bar. She lost me every time she chose secrecy instead of respect. I didn't write goodbye. Goodbyes invite arguments, excuses, promises, and bargaining. I wanted none of it. At 4:30 that morning, while she was still sleeping, I loaded my car. I stopped once outside the bedroom and watched her breathe, wondering how one person could feel so familiar and still seem completely distant. Then I quietly shut the door and left. I didn't block her number. I wanted her to wake up confused. I wanted her to see the packed luggage, read the note, and realize the trip was never happening. Neither was the future she thought she still controlled. By the time I reached the highway, my phone was vibrating constantly. Missed calls, voicemails, messages that changed from confused to furious to desperate within an hour. I didn't open any of them. I kept driving. What she didn't know, and wouldn't understand until much later, was that I wasn't escaping. I was moving towards something she could never reach. And the consequences waiting for her had only begun. I thought putting enough distance between us would silence everything. I believed that after enough miles, the noise inside my head would finally fade. It didn't. Silence can't heal you when it's filled with memories. It only gives them more room to echo. Eventually, I stopped in a small coastal town I'd never once mentioned to her. It was so ordinary and forgettable that it felt safe. I rented a room above a bakery that smelled like burned sugar every morning. I spent my days wandering without a destination, pretending I was learning how to exist again. I kept telling myself I was rebuilding. The truth was I wasn't rebuilding anything. I was hiding and hoping the pain would rot away by itself. For a while, that seemed to work. Her messages became less frequent. The calls stopped coming every hour and dropped to 1 or 2 a day, then once every few days. I answered none of them. I didn't read them either. I deleted everything unopened, almost afraid her words might drag me back into a life I'd already buried. Then one afternoon I went downstairs for coffee and saw her. She wasn't standing in the doorway making a scene. She wasn't crying or shouting my name. She sat alone at a corner table with both hands around a mug, staring at the floor like she'd been waiting there for hours. My first thought was to turn around and act like I hadn't seen her. But my feet stayed planted. They always seem to fail me when it matters most. She looked thinner, exhausted in a way no amount of sleep could repair. When she finally raised her eyes and noticed me, relief didn't cross her face. Her expression fell apart. It was like she'd held herself together just long enough to reach me, and now there was nothing left. "I didn't follow you," she said quickly, like she'd practiced the sentence. "I swear. I just remembered you once said you liked the ocean because it made everything feel small. So I guessed. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it sounded romantic. Because it reminded me that she knew me. She simply chose not to protect what she knew." I sat across from her. I didn't touch her. I didn't ask how she found me or how long she'd been waiting. The answers wouldn't have changed anything. Then she told me everything. Not like someone confessing because she expected forgiveness, but like someone who had finally understood forgiveness wasn't coming. She admitted the affair had begun months before I found them at the bar. She said the man wasn't special. He was only available. She liked the person she became when someone new looked at her like she was exciting again. "I never thought you'd really leave," she whispered. "You always stayed." That sentence hit harder than any insult could have. Because she was right. I always stayed. Through the neglect. Through the lies I pretended not to see. Through all those nights when I felt invisible inside my own marriage. Until one day, I didn't. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. That scared her more than anything else. Anger would have meant I still cared. My calm meant I had already grieved our marriage while she was busy running from it. She asked if there was still a chance. Any road back. Any version of us that could survive what she'd done. I studied her for a long moment before answering. "There is," I said, quietly. "Just not one with me in it." Then she cried. Not loudly. Not for attention. Tears simply rolled down her face as the truth finally sank in. I stood, wished her well, and walked upstairs without turning around. That should have ended it. But consequences don't always arrive together. Sometimes they take their time. I assumed she would vanish after that meeting, after I made it clear that whatever remained between us was no longer mine to carry. I figured she'd return to the life she could still control, to her safety net, maybe even to him. But she didn't. At least not immediately. Instead, she kept finding small ways to reach me. An email I never opened with the subject, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." A voicemail where she breathed silently for 30 seconds before whispering, "I miss my best friend." She even mailed me a postcard, handwritten with smudged ink, like we were some tragic love story trapped in another decade. Still, I said nothing. Each time I ignored her, the pressure in my chest changed. It didn't become lighter or darker, just different. The pain had stopped screaming and was slowly learning how to sit beside me. Then I received a call. It wasn't Mallory, it was her boss. I nearly ignored it, but the company name appeared on the screen. And curiosity, that old habit that always seems to hurt me, made me answer. "Hey, this is Wesley from Sinclair and West," the man said. "Sorry to bother you, but Mallory listed you as her emergency contact. We found something, and we thought you should know." My blood turned cold. Wesley didn't explain much. Someone had filed a formal complaint against Mallory 2 weeks earlier. There were concerns about her contacting clients outside business hours, and the company had opened an investigation. But that wasn't what shook me. It was what he said next. "She told us she's dealing with personal trauma. She said her husband abandoned her, and that what you did left her emotionally unstable." My chest seemed to collapse. What I did to her? I hadn't betrayed her. I hadn't lied, cheated, or manipulated anyone. Yes, I left, but only after she had already burned our marriage to the ground. Now she was rewriting the ending so she could be the one who got hurt. I kept my answer brief. I confirmed we were separated and explained there had been no abuse or abandonment. Only the quiet death of trust. He thanked me awkwardly and ended the call. Afterward, I sat with the phone hanging loosely in my hand, staring at the blank wall like it might explain something. She wasn't trying to get me back anymore. She was trying to control the story. Even while everything around her collapsed, she still needed people to see her as the victim. Maybe she was protecting her job. Maybe it was her pride. Or maybe she couldn't accept that I had left and stayed gone. That call changed something in me. Until then, I'd only been escaping the confrontation, the chaos, and the wreckage she created. But I finally understood that silence wasn't enough. She had made one mistake. She pulled me back into the story. This time, I would write the ending myself. I didn't want to destroy her. That was never my goal. I wasn't looking for revenge, blood, or drama. I only wanted to reclaim the one thing she had slowly taken from me over the years. My peace. But I wouldn't let her bury my name to keep hers clean. So I gathered everything. The screenshots, the messages, the call records, the folder marked exit, which I'd once believed I would never need again. Then I wrote one long, carefully worded email. No insults, no anger, only the truth, supported by digital evidence and calm explanations. I sent it to her company's HR department and copied Wesley, the man who had called me. Then I logged out and let the silence return. A week passed without a word from her. Then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, one final message arrived from an unfamiliar number. There was no subject, only this: "You win. I lost everything." I didn't respond. Not because I felt nothing, but because I finally understood that winning had nothing to do with revenge. It wasn't about watching her lose. It was about letting her go. I had spent years tearing myself apart, wondering what I lacked, why I wasn't enough, what part of me had driven her to search elsewhere for attention, excitement, and affection. But as I sat in that rented apartment by the ocean, the answer became beautifully simple. I was never the problem. I had only stayed too long with someone who wanted chaos more than love. She didn't lose because I exposed her. She lost because she still couldn't tell the truth, even after I walked away without a fight. As for me, I found something far better than revenge. I found peaceful mornings. I found work that didn't drain the life from me. I reconnected with old friends I had stopped calling because Mallory always said they were too much. I learned to laugh again. Real laughter, not the forced sound I used to make across the dinner table. Then one day, when I wasn't searching for anyone, I met someone new. She wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be rescued. She simply listened when I spoke. She looked me in the eyes and didn't pull away when I told her the worst parts of what I had survived. We aren't rushing. There are no grand promises or deadlines. Just peaceful days, honest conversations, and trust. So no, I didn't destroy my ex-wife. I didn't ruin her life. I never screamed, begged, or burned everything down. That night, I simply walked out of the bar and never looked back. And somehow, by losing her, I found everything I had been missing inside myself.